Hello, this is Debbie, and this is Light Up Your Worth. I'm excited for you to be here with me and my guest, Avery Thatcher. She's a former ICU registered nurse with over a decade of experience specializing in acute and chronic stress, its impact on the body, and how to prevent or even reverse the negative health effects of stress to avoid burnout and illness. In her Flow State app and group program, she's been helping highly sensitive high achievers recover their energy and optimize their habits so that they can elevate their impact since she started her business in 2015. Welcome, Avery.
Thanks so much for having me, Debbie. I'm really excited to be here. I feel like with the introduction that you read, it needs to have super nerd written in there somewhere because, yeah, it's definitely who I am.
I love that. From one nerd to another, nerds rule the world. Here we I wanted to talk about what exactly is a highly sensitive person. And I'll start there because I'm also thinking about how is that different than like an empath or are they similar, different titles? But I thought I'd get your perspective on what that is, Avery.
Yes, I'm glad you brought up the empath piece because really the word empath came out when the spiritual side started to take over the idea of being a highly sensitive person. So there's
Mhm.
definitely a lot of overlap in there. I approach things from a more logical space than like a woo woo spiritual space, but
Uh-huh.
there's overlap for sure. So your highly sensitive person can easily get overstimulated by environments around them. So, like large crowds, if there's lots of noise, they can just feel all of that extra stimulation and it can mentally or emotionally drain them. They also generally feel things much more strongly and deeply. So the emotional reactions can be like this freight train that takes off and you're like hanging on the outside being like, and as it zips down the thing. Learning how to stay on the platform is really important for highly sensitive people. So that way they can notice their emotion and be like, that's interesting. Gonna deal with that later. And be able to stay in that more objective space. And
Mhm.
then these people are also really good at reading the room, reading individuals, picking up on all those subtle cues that other people might overlook. And a lot of highly sensitive people do experience some degree of emotional trauma growing up because their sensitiveness, their ability to read other people, read their parents, can be very challenging for them, for those people that they're reading. So then we're like leaning into how do we navigate with that when we've been told that aspect of us is wrong. So the highly sensitive person really falls into those buckets.
Mhm. Now, is this something that develops later in life, or is it something that happens that you're just
Yeah,
born with it, or can your environment create it?
a little bit of both. So a lot of us are born that way.
Mhm.
And so this just means that right from the start, you are feeling things so much deeper. And as children, you're often told, "Oh, you're just being too sensitive. They didn't mean it that way. Calm down, relax a little. You're making too much out of this." So when you're hearing all of those things, that often shows that you were a highly sensitive person, maybe growing up in a more logical household that struggled to help support you in the way that you needed. But absolutely, I truly believe that all of us are sensitive people. And it's something that we need to learn how to unlock because when you aren't born expressing it, it doesn't mean that you don't have those qualities, but it's a really important skill to develop, especially as we're looking into growth and personal growth, career growth, all those kinds of things, because emotional intelligence is such a valuable part of our day to day interactions.
Isn't it? Oh my gosh. And I heard some of those expressions that you're talking about growing up,
Oh,
but I also know I'm an intuitive. So that's why I'm trying to figure out, like, oh, maybe that's how it started out with the intuition and sensing the reading the room. And
yeah. I found this really interesting story about intuition because, again, I approach things from a bit of a more logical view.
Mhm.
So there was this fire chief, and he was in, I think it was Chicago, and team were there fighting this huge fire. And all of a sudden he says the building's going to collapse. Everybody out. Get everybody out. And so we called everybody out. Within 30 seconds of everybody being out, the building collapsed. And so then there was a review committee being like, how did you know? All of the sensors were saying everything was fine. The temperature gauges were saying everything was fine. How did you know the building was going to collapse? And he says, I just got a feeling. And so when they looked into it more, what they found out was that his intuition was really filtering all of those bits of information, and it noticed that everything went quiet. So the fire had run out of oxygen to burn. So that means that it was going to start to suck in, causing the building to collapse. So when we look at things like intuition, really it is highly sensitive traits. And it's our body's ability to be able to sort through the 80,000 bits of information every second and pull out the right pieces. People that are more intuitive, they are better at filtering all of that information to pull out the right pieces because the universe is always talking to us in so many different ways. Our intuition is also a skill that we can develop by learning how to pull out those right pieces.
Oh, that is, I love that description. That's just so easy to understand in that story of taking something that you just know is going to happen. And oh, so how were you able then to navigate through working in healthcare for a decade? ICU is intense.
It is intense. Yes. And it's a lot of it comes from the perspective that I chose to have.
Mhm.
And going into it, I had grown up in that very logical environment that like shut things down. So I had numbed out my emotions for the most part. But then I realized very quickly in my nursing career that empathy, that connection, that human connection was so valuable to those people that were at their worst moments and their families that were watching them go through their worst moments. So I really just embraced the fact that I was going to cry a lot. And I just moved through my career feeling things. And I think for me, absolutely it's tough, but I'm good at being sad. So why not just find the balance there? And it's about learning how to process those emotions, not just be in the sadness all the time and finding the meaning there. Because really, even though the ICU is a very intense place, it really felt like an honor to be able to hold that
Mhm.
emotion for people and hold space for that.
Yeah, I know it takes a special kind of nurse to work in ICU. Having worked with lots of them, it really does. And I believe that crying is healing.
Absolutely. I completely agree.
Like, instead of bottling it up, the crying is actually the release for your soul to be able to not store it in your body. Because I firmly believe we store emotions in our body, and there's lots of science about that now. So hallelujah.
Yes, I know. It's nice when science finally catches up to what we all know.
Yeah, thank you, hippies, for starting all of that and all the
Yes.
scientists even.
Listening to your intuition, filtering
15,
out the
60s.
information.
How did you go from working in the ICU to now helping people with the burnout and the stress of burnout and illness that comes with it?
Yeah. So I really noticed very early on that some of the top reasons why people ended up in an ICU were because of illnesses and diseases that could be linked to chronic stress. Your heart attacks, your strokes. Even though cancer doesn't have direct links to stress as a causal factor, when we look at the kind of lifestyle and behaviors that you generally have that do lead to cancer, those are often caused by stress and overwhelm and burnout. There's just a ton of things that really led to a lot of people being there in the ICU, especially on the medical side. And so I realized that although I was good at helping people in this scenario, I was very good at helping people through some of those scenarios, but I could do more by preventing someone from getting there in the first place. So that's where I shifted my practice in 2015 to be more on the preventative side rather than the reactive side of healthcare.
Mhm.
And that's where we really dig into stress management strategies and things. And actually, I was teaching those for about 3 years. And I was also working full time, 12-hour shift work because high achiever over here. How long?
Mhm.
Yeah, right. And at the end of 2018, I had a very epic burnout experience that snuck up on me and I did not see it coming. And I felt lied to because I was doing everything right, quote unquote. I was meditating, I was practicing yoga, I was journaling, I was making time for myself, I was doing self-care, I was eating well, all of the things, but my body still broke very epically, and it's left me with a chronic illness and a disability, multiple chronic illnesses. I felt lied to because all of the research was saying, "Hey, do this and everything will be fine." So then I looked back in to find the missing pieces of the puzzle and what actually prevents burnout and all of those negative health effects of stress, and that's really what we focus on now.
Oh, okay. So now I'm fascinated, wanting to understand that because I myself am struggling with health issues. I've continued to struggle with them and they're just getting worse, even though I'm doing all the things that you actually just talked about. And so I'm thinking, I think I'm helping my body, but
It does help,
yeah.
but there's just the missing piece there. Do you wanna get
Mhm.
into that?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So, my favorite way to explain this is to use an analogy. So, I want you to imagine that you're sitting in a boat, and that boat is full of holes, but it's okay because you have a bucket and a life jacket. So, as the water's slowly pouring into that boat, you're using your bucket to bail yourself out. You're scooping up the water and chucking it over your shoulder. Off you go. But then eventually that water starts to come in a little faster and you start to get tired. Your arms are getting tired. You can't keep bailing yourself out. So then you sink to the point that your life jacket catches you. And so in this scenario, burnout is your life jacket. It's our body's fail-safe protective mechanism that keeps us from failure. And our bucket are those stress management strategies, the meditation, the mindfulness, the yoga, the self-care, the nutrition, all of the things. But you have to have energy to do them. You have to be able to keep up with the rate of the stress pouring in for you to be able to do that. So all of those holes in your boat are letting all of that stress pour in like water into your life. And what we need to start doing is looking at those different holes and figuring out which ones we can plug, because there's some that we can do something about, but mainly which ones can we not do something about? This state of the world that we live in. It's a dumpster fire, let's be real. And then
Yes.
inflation and
Uh-huh.
the way our healthcare systems are set up is not really meant to keep you healthy. It's just to react once you get sick. So, like, all of these things are holes in our boat that we need to learn how to manage and to slow the flow of the stress in so that we can keep up. So, it's really more about finding the energy balance. And that's why I often talk about how burnout is an energy management issue, not a stress management issue.
Mm. So that's a really great analogy with all the things you have to really look at all your stressors, whether they're in your life, your environment, and see which ones you can actually control over. Like we obviously can't control the dumpster fire that's happening right now
Oh,
out there, but we can control some things in our life.
absolutely. And we can
And that,
also control the amount that the dumpster fire affects us.
mm,
So, like looking into some of the mindset shifts that we need to make, some of
mm,
the habits that we need to change so that way we're not doom scrolling and making ourselves feel worse. Doing some of those habits too to really manage the stressors that we can't turn off, but the ones that we can still figure out some strategies for that. So, even though there's
mhm.
stressors that we can't get rid of, we can still do things for them.
That reminds me of when I was a single mom in my 30s and I was getting huge migraines, put you out for 3 days. And you go to all the different doctors and they tell you, oh, it's a tension headache. You're going to need to change stuff in your life. And I'm thinking, I can't really change my job, otherwise we'll be homeless.
Yep.
And that's what they always suggest, right? Oh, you're like, if I don't have a high stress tech job, how am I going to actually pay for the house? And if
Hmm.
I don't, so it was this vicious circle. So do you help them through those thinking about some of those tougher choices? Like if it is your job that is creating so much of your stress or a relationship or financials or whatever, there's so many things. It could be health. And,
Absolutely. Yeah. And one of the big problems is that our stress response was not designed for modern stress. It
Mhm.
was designed for the like moment of seeing something scary running at us and either running away or fighting it off. And so with modern stress, that's where we've developed the freeze or fawn responses. But really, when we're looking at all of these stressors that our body's not designed for, we have to start to break it down into the kind of energy that it takes and the energy that it drains from us. So there's four different kinds of energy that we have. The first is our physical energy. It's our, can I get up off the couch or do I need to give myself a pep talk to be able to go pee? Because I've got nothing left in the tank. The next kind is mental energy. This is something that for me drains very quickly with some of the cognitive effects of my chronic illnesses. And that's where we either have a lot of ability to solve complex problems, deal with complex things, make good decisions. When we're low on a mental energy, we come home at the end of the day and someone asks us what for dinner, and we're just like, I don't know, pizza. Because you can't think of anything else,
Mhm.
right? And then there's emotional energy. This is our ability to hold space for people to not feel irritable or impatient. And so when we're really low on, that's where we feel, usually from the highly sensitive person, that's where you just feel like drained, like you've got nothing left to give.
Mhm.
And then the last piece, typically I call it fulfillment burnout, but it's also our metaphysical energy. It's our ability to feel connected to our purpose, like what we're doing matters. So when we're looking at, for example, a job that you need to be able to pay the bills, but it's not fulfilling you, then we need to look at ways to make it fulfilling. For example, I had a client that she was in an accounting job and I hate it. It's awful. I don't enjoy it at all, but it pays the bills and I can't get another job that's this easy, this good for me. I have to make this work. And so we're like, okay, so what actually fulfills you just in life in general? And so she came up with a couple of ideas. Then we figured out, how can you make that come into your work life, even though the work itself drains you? So she decided to set up a community library for the workplace. So she brought in a bunch of books where people could bring in books for themselves, for their kids, and they would just exchange books on this shelf. She got a free bookshelf off of Facebook Marketplace, donated books from different places, and off she went. And that created a sense of community that she felt she was lacking in her accounting job. So
Mm.
even though her job didn't change, she didn't quit and move on, she found more purpose there. So there's a lot that we can do for our burnout and for the stress and the impact of some of these things that, again, we can't change, but we can learn how to make them work better for us.
Oh. So then maybe we should talk through what are differences then if we're talking about the stress with burnout and trauma? Like, how are those different? Because I would think then that there's different strategies to get through the different version.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I love this question because I think those terms are often thrown out there.
Mhm.
Oh, Netflix canceled that series I was watching. It's so traumatic. Oh, it's not exactly that though. So, yeah, let's break it down. So, stress is what our body was designed to handle. It's that initial moment, and then you get away to safety or you fight your way to safety. Uh, but then again, because our body was not built for modern stress, we actually move through three different stages of chronic stress. So, this is the stage of alarm, is our initial stage that we're meant to handle. That's what our stress switch is designed for. The next stage is our stage of resistance. And so, in here is where we're able to create or consume enough energy to keep up with the increased stress demand. So, our stress response requires a lot more energy in our body, a lot more physical energy. And so, our liver can create some energy to help us out. And this is why, when we're really stressed, we crave the high fat, high carb, high sugar comfort foods because they're quick, easy energy for us. And it needs more energy to be able to support our body. And so then when we're in that stage of resistance, we're able to manage and everything's okay. But then if more stuff piles on, then we get heavier and heavier and we can't keep up with bailing out our boat. We lose the energy. So then that's when we move into the final stage, the stage of exhaustion. And this is what burnout is. All of our four energy batteries are drained. We've got something is just completely drained and we just feel like we have nothing to give. And when we talk about burnout, often people think of it as a circle. Like you start up here at the top, everything's great. And then it gets to be a little bit too heavy. You take on a little bit too much, or too much happens, and then you hit the bottom when you're in burnout. But that's okay because then you rest for a little bit. Everything gets back up to normal and you're back up to where you started. So that's usually what people think about burnout as, is that
Mhm.
circle. But it's actually more like a wave, like a ball bouncing down a hill. You start up in your peak performance space and then you bounce down into burnout. You recover a little, but you're nowhere near where you started. And then you go back down into burnout, much lower than before. And then eventually you're just like hovering around this bottom space where it feels like you get your head above water and then life kicks you down again. And then you're just like, oh, I'm burnt out again. So when we're looking at burnout from that perspective, a lot of us, when we start to realize we're burnt out, we're actually in that full collapse burnout where we now have to dig ourselves out those three other stages. Now, where trauma fits into this is trauma is actually an injury to our nervous system.
Yeah.
So it's not just a stressful or distressing event. And absolutely, those still require help and support to heal from them because they're very impactful. But
Mhm.
trauma actually damages your nervous system, which means then some of the strategies that we were talking about earlier, the meditation, the mindfulness, they can actually be harmful for somebody with trauma until they've done the work to heal that injury to their nervous system.
Mhm.
For example, I was in a phase where my PTSD from being an ICU nurse was flaring up. And I was really struggling with a lot of it, struggling with a lot of anxiety and things. And that's when my OCD diagnosis appeared as well. And so I was like, I feel so overwhelmed right now. I'm going to do what I know makes me feel better. And I sat down on my meditation cushion. I was just like taking a couple deep breaths. All of a sudden, I was outside walking my dog. We were 20 minutes away from the house. I had no idea how I got there. Grateful I was wearing a jacket and shoes, but I had no recollection of those spaces because I completely dissociated. So when we have an injury to our nervous system, then we downregulate a little bit too much in some of these activities. It can
Mhm.
actually trigger the trauma response to happen again, which often can lead to something like dissociation, which can lead to amnesia and those blank blocks of time. So when we are looking into treating someone for burnout or stress, if they do have trauma that has not been healed, then it's vitally important that we address that first.
Mhm. Now that makes a lot of sense. Having struggled this year greatly with um, those four energies that you're talking about and being able to navigate through it. I really like the analogy of the wave too, because it feels like just to keep up takes an extraordinary amount of income. Yeah, there are many times I'm sitting on my chair in the living room. I need to use the restroom, like you said, and I have to really pump myself up to
Right.
be able to do that. And I'm not sitting there reading, I'm not sitting there watching TV. I'm just sitting there and I just
Mhm.
feel like you space out
Yeah,
and you
that's
don't even
so
know where you're going.
yeah, absolutely. That's such a key sign of overstimulation as well as the energy drain because you just have nothing on. You're not focusing on anything else. You're really
Mhm.
just sitting because that's what you have the mental and emotional capacity for.
Yeah,
Oh,
and it
yeah.
comes and goes where at first I was able to do some, like, nonfiction reading. I could focus, and now I find that even just reading something that I want to read, something enjoyable, it's just a take you away kind of book with my book club, and I'm like,
Huh.
"I'm not be able to read right now." Like, any
Yeah.
access reading or memory recall from something, I put, like, 3 places for every appointment I have,
Yeah.
and I tell my boyfriend the night before,
Yeah.
just to make sure, and he'll remind me, what time were we on today?" Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. And truly, my house is covered in sticky notes. Yeah, like, don't forget to do this. Don't forget to do that. And it's just so helpful to have those additional reminders, especially when you have either low mental energy due to something like stress or burnout, or it's a more health related thing that causes those cognitive issues.
Mm.
But yeah, I have no shame. There are sticky notes and messages on mirrors and all kind of things. So,
Yeah, that's really interesting. So you really have to start looking at the trauma and then start to deal with the stress and the burnout. And working in healthcare for a decade, I've seen in working with leaders and coaching them through improvements and change management, I've never seen so much burnout. And I worked 2 decades in high
yeah.
tech. And
Okay.
having been in healthcare through the pandemic, I see leaders who are just an exhaustion that a night's sleep does not correct.
Absolutely. So it's really interesting that you said that because Indeed.com, which is a job board site that's really big in North America,
Mhm.
they did a survey of people and who experienced burnout. And so in 2019, before the pandemic, they did a survey to see who's feeling burnt out right now. And it was between 9 and 11%, depending on the demographic. And then they did it again in 2022 and 2023. And now it's 67 to 73% of people are experiencing burnout. And that is a huge jump. And when we look at some of the research that's been coming out, it's like the pandemic really slowed a lot of things down, which wasn't the worst thing. But then a lot of people are trying to make up for lost time. And so there's this pressure to like, you lost a whole year with the shelter in place. So go, you got to figure this out. And then with healthcare as well, they didn't get that time off. And their workload increased without any additional funding or
Mm-hmm.
additional support or staff. So again, there's just a lot of drain without a lot of recharge. So a lot of people are really living in that sort of old iPhone battery space where it like
Mm-hmm.
never holds a charge anymore. It just keeps like dumping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've noticed that in healthcare, what I've experienced doing process improvements where I come in to help them solve a problem is that you go through and we would come in year and a half after the pandemic. And now everybody wants to finish all their projects all over the organization, but
Yep.
it's the same people. And so now they're struggling with staffing, keeping staffing. And now we have to try to get, like you said, make up for that time that we all got behind because we didn't have time. Because,
Yeah. And
mm,
behind on these imaginary deadlines.
yeah, like it's like behind the eight ball of trying to catch up. But yet, all the leaders, and these are some good people, are just they just don't have anything extra to give anymore.
Mhm.
And the ones who aren't, some are holding their boundaries and some aren't, and you're starting to see that. How does burnout is it correlated with depression?
Yes, very much. Burnout is often, especially if it's related to depression, starts off with emotional drain. So you would have burnout in one or all four of those different energy batteries.
Mhm.
And so depression is often burnout in the emotional category because then that starts to drain everything else and you don't feel as fulfilled anymore. You don't have as much mental capacity anymore. And your physical energy also is just not there no matter how much you sleep. So yes, there's a lot of overlap between emotional burnout and depression
Mhm.
for sure.
Yeah, so if you get an acute depression CPT code, which is the coding for your insurance companies to pay, is that's probably why they're seeing such an increase as well in those diagnoses.
I think so. And then also, again, the state of the world that we're living in, because it's so much more connected and we're able to see so many more tragedies in our face all the time, it really impacts us differently. So I think
Mm,
there's a lot of ways that technology absolutely serves us, but it can also sabotage us as well. And this is, again, we're realizing the holes in your boat and how big those holes are right now to see if you can
mhm,
do anything to close them up a little is really important. Because yes, absolutely depression does have a biological and physiological side to it with the serotonin and some of the dopamine as well. But there is a lot of environmental factors that can
mhm.
play a role too.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification because I know I've seen it a lot more happening just all around me and myself. And
Oh,
so now, how can you really unlock the productivity potential without burning yourself out in the first place? So if you're on that start of that little wave before you go all the way down, what are some strategies?
yeah. So the way that we actually recover from burnout is in three main stages. You have to first recover your energy. Because again, if you want to be able to use some of those stress management recovery things, your bucket, you have to have the energy to do it. You have to want to. And
Mhm,
if you're like a full on burnout, you don't want to do anything. You just want to survive. So we need to start to recover some of that energy. And a lot of this is looking for little pockets of time. And so this is where our app comes in because it talks about 60-second guided meditations, 15-minute yoga practices. You're not looking for the all or nothing, like either I go to a 90-minute yoga class and nothing at all, but what can I do for 5 minutes right now? What can I do for 30 seconds before I walk into the grocery store? those little pockets of time are really going to help you recharge that energy. So that's stage one, is to recover. Stage two is where we start looking at optimizing. And this is where we focus on really, what is your clarity? What are you actually working towards? And so, like I explained in that earlier story, she wasn't just hating her job, she was really missing the connection. And by creating a sense of community around that library, she brought that back into a very computer focused, numbers heavy workspace. And she just created this for everyone. So, really looking at, what are we really working towards here? And that's where we start to then optimize different habits, different time management strategies, and things to really work towards what you really want, what's really going to give you all of your energy back and really not leave you in that burnout space. And then
Mhm.
finally, we move into that elevate space. And this is where we're looking to really align our behaviors, our thought patterns. This is a really good time to go back in and dig into some of those trauma aspects as well, to start to work through them. Because again, you need to have the energy to do it. So in the recover phase, if you are dealing with trauma, then there's certain activities that you'd want to do slightly differently, just because you don't want to trigger that injured part of your nervous system. But once you finally have the energy back up and you're feeling more like yourself, then
Mhm.
you're ready to address some of those deeper patterns and beliefs.
Yeah, I like that idea that you have very short things, the 60 seconds, the 5 minutes, because when you're down like that,
Right. Yeah,
it's trying to find the motivation.
exactly. I wish I could meet the person that said, have 30 minutes a day of self care, because I want to shake them. And it'd be like, why? Why would you say such a thing and put such an unrealistic expectation out there for people?
Mhm.
Because when you're looking at your day, you're just like, hey, I need to find 30 minutes to start with. And then make sure I have energy when that time comes, because it's usually going to be at the end of the day.
Mhm.
Yeah, pockets of time are absolutely the way to go. They make such a huge difference. And they actually turn off your stress response regularly throughout the day, so you have a better chance of sleeping later and not waking up at like 3:30 or 4 in the morning and struggling to
Mhm.
fall back asleep. Absolutely. Make it accessible for yourself. Make it possible, because it's going to build that motivation to then maybe expand those times and actually have a half hour somewhere, but it doesn't always have to be that way.
Yeah. And what is about that waking up at 3:30 to 4:30 in the morning? How many of us have had that? And you're like, really? By the time you fall back to sleep, seems like you get the best sleep of your night, and then the alarm goes off.
Absolutely. Yes. One of our hormones in our body, that's the stress hormone, is called cortisol. And it gets such a bad reputation in the media. Everyone says, oh, cortisol is so harmful. But really, I see it as a superhero, because it is running around your body, telling all of your cells, saying, tell the brain you're hungry. Tell the brain you're hungry. You need more energy. We can do this. And so that's where we get all those extra cravings for all of those foods that we talked about earlier.
Mhm.
But cortisol is also our natural caffeine kick. It's our wake me up hormone. It's but usually our hormone cycle for cortisol sort of peaks around between 6 and 9 a.m. And that's when we feel like, oh, we're going to wake up. And it usually brings us out of sleep. And then it slowly peters off throughout the day so that our next hormone, melatonin, can kick in to help bring in our readiness for sleep. But the thing is, if we're really stressed out, our cortisol levels resting are just higher. So that means that we cross that wake me up threshold much earlier, because we don't have to come from all the way down at the bottom, taking the whole 6 to 8 hours overnight to cross that wake me up threshold. It's now only needing 3. So that it wakes us up generally around 3:30 or 4. So by doing some of those self-care things in those pockets of time, we're constantly turning off our cortisol level, trying to allow it to lower or at least stabilize, so that way we can
Mhm.
keep it as far away from that wake me up threshold as possible.
Oh, you just solved so many people's problem of understanding why that's happening.
Absolutely. And it's so common. And it's really that 3:30 to 4 a.m. block where you did the wake up and it's your
Mhm.
brain is like, zing, let's do this. And you're like, oh, but it's still dark. No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I have another couple hours to be able to sleep.
Yeah. And
Oh,
you need it.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about this, we talk about there's a lot of things that we can't really focus on, but in our culture, it just seems to be so prevalent to have burnout in our workplace. So, is there anything that we can do to really stop continuing these cycles of this happening?
Yeah. One of my favorite things to share and to suggest is all around the word priorities. So the word priority was actually only pluralized after the Industrial Revolution with all of the assembly lines and modern day
Mhm.
capitalism picking up and all those things. Because priority, when we look at the word, the Latin root of the word, here's a super nerd coming out. The Latin root of that word means first thing. And there could only be one thing first,
Mhm.
right? So you can
Yeah.
only pick up one thing first. So when we look at how to really prevent that cycle of burnout and to really slow down the stress and pressure we're putting on ourselves, the stress and pressure that capitalism has taught us from school age on, is to focus on one priority for the day. If you only get one thing done today, what's it going to be? And so for me today, the one thing which I wanted to get done was to make sure that I had the right mental energy and emotional energy for this chat.
Mhm.
That was the only thing. That doesn't mean that's the only thing I did today or that I'm going to do today. But it means that if fires come in, my day goes sideways, I feel completely drained, I know that I got my one thing done today. I got my primary focus done. And it just helps to build that motivation as well. It also helps to build some of that fulfillment energy. And it really helps with the burnout prevention because you're starting to set boundaries. It's like baby boundaries when we have just one focus.
I like that idea. I actually had a guest on who did goal setting for small entrepreneurs.
Awesome.
And that's what she said. There's one goal to help with overwhelmed. And so I love it when guests are sharing different strategies that align and they're coming from two different worlds and
Mhm.
two different focuses of how they serve people. And so
Absolutely.
I love that you provided the science behind her process. So
There you go.
that was
Yes,
great.
and we all know if you hear things a couple of times, that
Mhm.
message might be meant for you. So maybe listen, filter that piece of information in.
Yes. Now, what would be something that you want to make sure that the listeners are really grasping? If they remember one thing off of our talk today, what would that be?
That always do your best doesn't mean always be perfect. Your best is going to change moment to moment, day to day. What your best looks like each day is going to change. And it's okay to just accept that's where you're at. With whatever mental, physical, emotional energy you have to give, if you gave all that you had, you're good. That's all you can expect. Always do your best doesn't mean always be perfect.
Oh, I like that. We need to kick that perfectionist thing to the curb.
Always.
Oh my
She's a
goodness.
rough one. Yeah.
It is. It really is. So now I want to switch gears and talk
Yeah.
through the questions that I absolutely loved here and I'm so curious about with all my guests. And the first one is I really believe in music, how it can really uplift us and shift everything, right? Shift our mood or whatever's happening. And so, what is a song that you go to do that shift for yourself?
So my go-to song for this is called All I Know So Far by Pink. And it just really talks about life is going to kick you down,
Mhm.
but sometimes you just have to throw your hair back and just stand in the wind and say, do your worst. I've got this. And it really just summarizes how I feel about hope, that hope is not this gentle little ethereal thing. It's gritty and dirty, and you're like wiping your face off before standing up and be like, let's do this. So, yeah, that song really gives me the let's do this vibe.
Oh, I love that. I'm going to be adding that to the playlist that I have on the YouTube channel.
Sounds great.
Oh, great. The second question is if you could go back now in the season of what you've learned in this point in life, if you could go back to your younger self, what would you tell her about your own worth?
So, I would tell her to really listen to her emotions more because a lot of what people were making her feel that those emotions were not valued or valuable really degraded her sense of worth. because she felt like she was wrong. So I would say feel the emotion. Don't forget to feel the emotions, because it's when you stopped feeling your emotions that you forgot your worth.
Oh, that's powerful. That's really powerful.
It feels like it to me too. Like whenever I talk with people and when I'm working with them, there's so many people that have forgotten their worth because they've chosen not to feel anything anymore
Mhm.
because it's just easier. So we're again going to learn how to not be hanging on to the emotional freight train that zips off. It's learning how to notice the emotions rather than getting swept up in them.
Mhm.
It's so important for reconnecting to your worth.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are scared of others' emotions. Have you noticed when you start crying, somebody wants to hand you a tissue?
Yes. Oh, there's definitely some people that really struggle with sharing emotion or getting into some of the deeper conversations. And that's why I'm on the mission that I am, because I want to show more people that this is actually our true nature. We really need to lead into this because it's not going to be more painful. It's actually going to make life so much more sparkly.
Mhm. Yeah, so we all want more sparkling.
Yeah. Sparkly life is the best. It's
Oh, Avery, I've so enjoyed our conversation, and I know that there are listeners who are going to want to reach out to you. And so, how can they find you, Avery?
Thank you so much for asking for that. So the best place to go is to my website. It's called becomingavery.com. And you can find all kinds of free resources out there that are all to work within those little pockets of time that we talked about.
Mm.
And then you can also find out more information about the podcast that I have if you want to hear a little bit more from me.
Yes, would love that. And now, tell me what your app was again, too.
Yes. So we called it the flow state originally, but we actually changed it because of our users to creating calm. So it's called the Creating Calm app,
Hmm.
and it has 15-minute yoga classes that you can do either on your own time or you can join some of them live. We've got Qigong classes, healing sounds, somatic release. We've got journal prompts, meditation exercises that are anywhere between 60 seconds to 30 minutes. There's all kinds of things in there, and it's all meant to really work within those pockets of time that you have.
I love that. We will put all of that in the show notes for you listeners. So, if you didn't catch it, since you're on your elliptical machine, we'll have that for you. So, thank you so much, Avery, for being here and sharing so much wisdom with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Debbie. It's just so meaningful to have these kinds of conversations because I feel like, especially with the state of the world that we're in, we
Mhm.
need people like you to hold space for this. So thank you.
So, thank you.